Ladies and gentlemen, viewers of our social media platforms, subscribers, and regular guests, welcome. Today we are honored to host the former US Ambassador, Mr. Richard Kauzlarich. We warmly welcome him to our studio and truly appreciate that he has taken the time to join us. Thank you, Mr. Kauzlarich. With your permission, we would now like to move on to a series of important and timely questions, many of which have been collected directly from our audience. Okay, first question. Mr. Ambassador, do you believe that the idea of democracy is a utopia in today's world? Or is it rather a form of Western franchising used to govern former colonies under a new label called independent states?
Well, I think democracy is how countries define it. I think the idea of people having a choice in terms of the form of government and who represents them is important. And that will happen in different ways in different places. And I think that if you look around the world today, everyone would have to agree that democracy is under a great deal of pressure, including in the United States.
Mr. Ambassador, could you please tell us, in today's world, is a clash of civilizations and religions still possible?
Well, I think what we see today is a move away from an international system that's based on rule of law and respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries. It's a world that's much more transactional. In other words, countries look at their interests, try to solve their problems, and are not as concerned about the impact of those relationships on the broader international system, a system that has been in place since the end of the Second World War.
Mr. Ambassador, our next question is, how do you think in international politics in relations means a decrease in the power of law in international relations? A decrease in the power of law to the right of the strong can lead to a change in the world order.
Well, I think it could lead to a shift in the global order if problems like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, some of the problems that China is creating with respect to Taiwan and its neighbors are not dealt with in a responsible way. I think that's the challenge. And the Trump administration is pursuing a different approach than previous administrations have to both of these problems. And part of the challenge now is particularly for the leading world powers like the United States, like China, and like the European Union, to begin to go back to these principles that have governed the international order since the end of World War II.
Thank you. Then the next question, how does the ambassador from Washington, from the United States, see the resolution of issues such as the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? How does he view the resolution of the Palestinian issue, the events that took place in Syria, and the tensions between Pakistan and India? Are these the signs of a new world being born?
Well, some of these problems have been with us for a while, unfortunately, like the Palestinian issue, like the conflict between India and Pakistan. But the most important one, I think, right now is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that's going to require sustained U.S. leadership and cooperation with our European allies if we are to resolve it. We have to prioritize the conflicts. And I think the priority will be first on the Russia invasion of Ukraine, second on the Palestinian issue, and then regrettably, some of the other problems will be of a secondary nature.
Mr. Ambassador, the next question. Could you please tell us, you served as the United States Ambassador to Azerbaijan. From the perspective of your diplomatic and academic experience, how do you currently view the developments in the South Caucasus, as well as possible future events in Central Asia, including those of a military nature?
Well, it's interesting to look back for now almost 30 years since the last time I was visiting Azerbaijan. And in many respects, Azerbaijan looks the same as when I left it in terms of the challenges of human rights, building of democracy, and respect for freedom of expression. What has changed is the Karabakh conflict. And unlike at the time that I was there, today there is a possibility of building a true peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan because of the consequence of the recent fighting and the war that led to the return of Karabakh to Azerbaijan. But it's going to take inspired leadership in Yerevan and in Baku to make the peace agreement real and to finally sign an agreement that will lead to a more peaceful future. So I think despite the challenges of democracy and human rights, which must be addressed, there is this possibility for a better future for Armenia and Azerbaijan if the leaders can sign the agreement that is apparently so close to being signed.
Mm-hmm. Our next question is, how does the ambassador assess the visits of the President of the United States to the Arab world and to China?
Well, and we are still in the very early days of the second Trump administration. So some things are still to be clarified. Let's put it that way. I think the fact that President Trump made his first trip to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states is an indication of how important that is. I think we've seen in the meetings that are taking place in Singapore in recent days of defense ministers from the U.S. and from other countries, there's a great deal of concern about China and China's military actions in the world entirely, but also particularly with respect to Taiwan. So I think that what we can expect, given the attention that the administration has placed on these two areas, up to this point, that there's going to be a lot of attention to China's role, not just regarding Taiwan, but in other parts of the world, including the Middle East.
Then the next question. Within the context of US-China relations, how does an experienced diplomat and scholar like Mr. Kauzlarich view the relationship between the United States and Russia? Does America need Russia as an anti-China project, that is, as a potential ally against China?
Well, I think the relationship between Russia and China, if anything, has gone closer in the last year in particular. Because of the Ukraine invasion, Russia needs help from others, and it has turned to China and North Korea for assistance, both in terms of economic relations, in the case of China, purchasing Russian energy, but also in terms of military supplies. So I think there's a great deal of concern about that Russian-Chinese relationship and where this might lead. I do not know where U.S.-Russian relations are headed, quite frankly, right now. It's impossible to predict President Trump. He seems to have different views at different times. Now he's very critical of Russia, but he still believes he has a relationship with President Putin that will allow at least some of these problems to be solved. But I'm not sure that he's going to be in a position to influence relations between Russia and China.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Then, the next question. Within the framework of US-China relations, how does an experienced diplomat and scholar like Mr. Kauzlarich view the relationship between the United States and Russia? Does the United States need Russia as part of an anti-China project? In other words, as a potential ally against China?
Well, I have a sense. Again, I'm sitting on the outside, not in the inside of the U.S. government. But my sense is that the Trump administration really does want to deal with the Iranian nuclear issue in a way that ends that as a challenge, uh, not just a challenge to the U.S., but to the whole world. I do not have a sense that the United States is anxious to go to war with Iran. I just don't see that as an alternative. Now, having said that, I'm also not particularly optimistic about the status of the negotiations with Iran on nuclear weapons. I've been rather pessimistic for a while, and I've seen nothing that would indicate that there's going to be a breakthrough on that front. So while I don't expect the U.S. to go to war with Iran. I don't expect a sudden breakthrough on the Iranian nuclear program. And quite frankly, Trump has been very clear about if there is a lack of progress, that Iran could face further economic sanctions, which would be the most likely response from the U.S. side toward failure to reach agreement on Iranian nuclear weapons.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Then, the next question. Within the context of U.S. policy toward China and possibly Iran, why does the United States need to return to the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan? Is it specifically to control these two strategic directions?
Well, I haven't followed that particular part of U.S. relations regarding Afghanistan in particular. I really don't have not in a position to say anything responsibly on that point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then the next question. What role does Israel play in U.S. policy in the Middle East?
Well, I think the relationship with Israel, the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu has gone through a good deal of change in this very short period since Trump became president. I think there's a continued support, not only by the American administration, but the American people, for an end to the fighting in Gaza, the release of the hostages that remain, and I think there's concern about Israel's intentions regarding Iran. We just talked about that. So it's a complicated relationship. We just had the tragic incident of two young people working for the Israeli embassy who were murdered in Washington. And that reminded us who have been diplomats of the dangers associated with representing countries who are in the middle of very difficult conflicts, such as Israel and to a certain extent the U.S. in terms of its support for Israel. So I think that it's a complicated relationship. We're concerned about anti-Semitism around the world and in our own country, quite frankly. But we're also concerned about how can we provide assistance to the not to Hamas, but to the Palestinian people who are in great need of that in Gaza. I served for 2 years in Israel at the U.S. Embassy there, and I know how complicated those relationships are and how difficult it is to deal with them. All the more so in the middle of a war such as we've seen there since October 7th, 2 years ago. So I think we really have to be concerned about that relationship above all others, because it can impact, as you've already mentioned, relations with Syria, relations with Iran, and involve both Russia and China as well.
Thank you for your answer. Mr. Ambassador, is there a Greater Middle East project? And if so, at what stage of implementation is it currently?
Gosh, that really is a difficult question. I mean, are there any situations that we see in the world today in a permanent state? Sadly, I think the Israeli-Palestinian conflict shows no sign of a peaceful resolution, and therefore it is one of those conflicts which may continue for the foreseeable future. There certainly is no interest now in pursuing, at least from the Israeli point of view, a two-state solution to the Palestinian issue. And with Hamas dominating the political process on the Palestinian side, um, now it seems even less likely that there's an interest on the Palestinian side to a peaceful resolution of this conflict. So I I think this is a difficult one and one that's likely to pursue or continue for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Recently, we have seen increased activity from European, Japanese, and to some extent British foreign policy in Central Asia. What kind of interest does Central Asia hold for the United States, and what is the US doing to protect its interests in the region?
Well, I think that's really a very important question. And again, at these early days of the Trump administration, it's hard to answer it with certainty. I think the United States would like to see countries in Central Asia develop independently of a strong relationship with China. There has been interest in the past in a middle transportation corridor that would allow the countries of Central Asia to trade with each other and across the Caspian with Azerbaijan and Turkey. But I don't have a good sense today that the administration is going to make this a priority area. I hope I'm wrong because I think it is an area that is the Caucasus and Central Asia that the U.S. has interests in. And the best thing we can do is to promote the economic interests, including energy. So there are opportunities for the U.S., but again, it's a question in this new era of transactional diplomacy that the Trump administration is engaging in, just how much we're going to be involved politically in these kinds of developments.
Next question. In Afghanistan, there is the Kush Taper Canal, which was funded by the American agency USAID. More than $600 million have been allocated for its development. If this canal becomes fully operational, most Central Asian countries could be left without water, and this would inevitably lead to conflicts, possibly even military ones. What is the US vision regarding this situation, given that the project was financed by the United States?
Well, that is a really good question. What is going to happen with all of these projects that USAID was funding around the world, including the one that you mentioned, now that the Trump administration has decided to end the existence of the Agency for International Development? That those responsibilities are going to be brought within the State Department. How many of the projects that in the past had been developed will be continued? I do not know. But it's going to be a much smaller AID program globally, and it's going to be focused on a few countries in a few regions. But all of that is still very much unclear as the reorganization that's going on under the Trump administration takes place. So one thing I know for sure, it won't be the same as it was during the Biden administration. But how it will change and what will happen to specific projects, I don't think anyone can say at this stage.
What does the ambassador think? Is a war in Central Asia possible in the future, either over water or for other reasons?
I've not followed that as carefully as I probably should. We can see that water in Central Asia and South Asia is very important. Look at the India-Pakistan conflict and how India has used, Pakistani access to water as a weapon. We know that in Central Asia there have been conflicts in the past that have been connected with water, and then you have the impact of climate change, which is affecting the flow of water and making it even more of a potential lever for conflict. I do not, and this may be because I have not followed the region as carefully as I did in the past. I do not have a feeling that there's a risk in the short term, say the next 3 years, of any major conflict between the states in Central Asia, particularly over water issues. But I will say that looked at on a global scale, the connection between water and energy is going to be an increasingly important foreign policy issue for many countries, including the United States.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. The question then is of this nature. Does the Greater Afghanistan project exist? If it does exist, at what stage of implementation is it?
Um, Here too, I think, in these early days, the administration has not taken a great interest in Afghanistan as a particular country in terms of priorities. Um, Pakistan and India, yes. Afghanistan, not so much. So I think that this is one of those areas that we really have to wait a while before we can see just what kind of a priority the Trump administration will attach to that. But I've seen nothing up to this point that would indicate there's a new priority on U.S. Afghanistan bilateral relations, except to the extent that that affects Pakistan and India.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much. Next question. Explain to ordinary people in simple language. What is the new world order and why the old order no longer works?
If I had to describe what the current world order is, that it's a kind of return to a set of relationships between countries that are governed by specific interests, mainly on a bilateral level. The old order, if you want to think of it that, the kind of liberal international economic system based on strong international institutions, including the UN and the World Bank and the IMF, World Trade Organization, has been basically changed for this set of relationships that are based on individual countries. So how do you see the difference, or how would citizens, including in my own country, see the difference? Well, you look at what the Trump administration is.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. As a diplomat and a scholar, how do you view the current world order? Is it truly a multipolar world, or is it in fact a world of the strong, dominated by the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council?
Well, I think it will. It will certainly not be an order that will depend on the UN or the World Trade Organization to deal with problems that countries face, like the United States. The United States, under President Trump, as I said, will deal with countries individually and bilaterally. So U.S. and China relations will not be determined by the World Trade Organization and its rules. It will be determined by decisions that President Trump and President Xi reach to deal with the immediate problems of trade and tariffs. So we're moving away from an order that's governed by a set of rules that generally countries accept as a group of countries in the United Nations or the World Trade Organization to these bilateral transactions between individual countries, which are going to be very much determined by the leaders of those countries coming to an agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The next question is, how does Mr. Ambassador feel about the theory, for now we will call it that the new world order is techno-corporations in which states and techno-corporations are partners?
That's going to be very interesting to see how that relationship evolves, because one of the challenges that large corporations face today, whether they're American or Chinese or European, is uncertainty. That old order, based on the rules that had evolved in the area of trade in particular, was predictable. There were conflicts. The conflicts were not necessarily solved, but the environment was predictable. Today, the environment is not predictable. So companies are reacting to, in the case of the United States, the president deciding to raise the duties on steel and aluminum over the weekend, which have great impact on U.S. manufacturing. They wait for the next announcement from the president, which could be to lower duties. So it's the uncertainty, I think, that's there for business to understand where government is going, particularly large companies who must invest in trade on a global scale. Mm-hmm. So I think we're in a period of uncertainty in terms of economic relations with countries, but most importantly, relations with companies.
Okay, very good. When the next question, Mr. went why then all orders related to artificial intelligence are carried out by private companies for the Pentagon, for example, Palantir Parsons, and why is America conducting a program to update its nuclear arsenal?
Well, two very, very different but important issues here. The challenges that artificial intelligence, AI, pose today for all of us are very important. They are not just challenges of how we are impacted by AI. I mean, can an AI tool teach my students at George Mason? And I don't need to. I would not need to be there. But it's also a global problem too. It brings in China. The competition between the U.S. and China for economic dominance. I think that if there is one issue beyond climate that is a global challenge, it is artificial intelligence and how it's dealt with. On nuclear, I think we're in a very delicate period. Very, very delicate because of we talked earlier about Iran, Russia's intentions in terms of nuclear weapons, our own decisions from the U.S. point of view to pull out of some of the long-standing arms agreements between the U.S. and first the Soviet Union and now Russia. I think it's a very dangerous time for new nuclear powers, whether it's India and Pakistan, who already have nuclear weapons, or other countries, including those in the Middle East, who would like to have. So I think we have two very important challenges that the countries of the world have to come together on. One, responsible use of artificial intelligence, and second, avoiding the proliferation of nuclear weapons and potentially a nuclear war breaking out.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We can conclude that new programs that are being tested in conjunction with artificial intelligence and drones, for example, in Ukraine, this is the White Stork project, the Maven program in Palestine, Lavender, and the presence of private military companies. For example, the G4 security company. Can we now conclude that all this is being raised in technological terms to a higher level of warfare, and with the presence of private military companies of less responsibility to society? Is this a struggle for leadership, or is this preparation for war with China?
Well, I think that, and I'm not a military person, so I feel a little uh, reluctant to go too deeply into this. But one thing I will say that, based on my experience in following these national security developments, the nature of war has changed radically. It really started, uh, in a sense, it was Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which kind of opened up the whole question of drones and how non-human actors can result in death and destruction. But it also, I think, raises questions about what are the types of international agreements that will be necessary to prevent uh, artificial intelligence in particular as it develops and these tools are able to act independently of human beings, what kind of international rules will be necessary to prevent basically wars being started or prolonged because of decisions of these artificial intelligence beings, actors, if you want to think of them in those terms. So I think it's a really important question. The role of kind of the private military organizations, thinking of Wagner Group in particular from Russia. I think we'll see more of that as time goes on, particularly in places like Africa and potentially in Latin America as well. So I think non-state actors, whether they're paramilitary or terrorist organizations like Hamas, are going to be continuing concerns as well. But there is, in this background, these radical changes based in part on technology, but in part on experience in the conflict, particularly between Russia and Ukraine, that are going to change how we approach war in the future, but most important, how we approach international rules to prevent war.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Next question. Please tell me the rivalry between the US and China. Is it competition or a fight for survival? And secondly, to this same question, is it a fight of civilizations of thinking, or is it just an economic war?
I think it's an economic war, quite frankly. It's a question of who's going to be the dominant economy because our two markets are so large and whether we like it or not, dependent on each other. The fact that there are geopolitical issues like Taiwan, which raise the possibility of conflict, it makes the economic relationship more difficult. And I think we'll see how far both China and the United States are going to go down the road of raising tariffs and then the other side raising tariffs. I think both the United States and China are harmed by what's going on today. But maybe I'm naive, but I see most of the the conflict, if you will, between the U.S. and China based on who has the economic advantage and who is taking advantage, if you will, of the other party. I'm more concerned about how international economics are going to influence the relationship between the U.S. and China than the possibility, and there is always the possibility because of Taiwan, of an actual conflict between the U.S. and China in a military sense.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I have two last questions for you. I will not bore you. Please tell me, Mr. Staff, is a direct military clash with the USA and China possible, and is a nuclear war between the two powers possible?
Well, I mean, it's always possible. As I said, the Taiwan issue is such an important issue for China. It's an important issue for the United States. It would really require China to take an aggressive position regarding Taiwan for there to even be the potential for a military conflict. Like I say, I think most of the competition between the U.S. and China is economic in nature and trade in nature, and I think that can be very difficult at times as well. But yes, war is possible when you have two large powers with large military and large naval forces in the same region. Conflict is possible, but I do not sense that there's a condition today that would lead me to believe there will be a military conflict between China and the U.S.
And the last question, Mr. Ambassador. Tell us, as your students, as your neighbors, as your children, there are many disputes in the world. Artificial intelligence, is it dangerous or not? What does the reactive use of ubiquitous use of artificial intelligence bring to humanity?
Well, I think just to look at it in terms of my university, I teach a class on communications for people in government. And one of the issues that comes up among my students is what is the appropriate use of artificial intelligence? And we spend a lot of time talking about ethics, talking about what are areas where artificial intelligence can be useful, and it can be if you're doing research, as long as you understand that the machine is not smarter than you are, at least not yet. But you need to make sure that you put guardrails on the use of artificial intelligence. So that's just, within the university, it's really a very, very important and a discussion that we have with faculty and with students as well. And I think it may take some time, but I think we'll get to a point where even though the technology is changing rapidly, we'll get to a point where we have a better understanding of how we can use this tool as a tool to do better research and to teach better as well. A broader sense, I think what is happening with artificial intelligence, and again, uncertainty connected with it, people are worried about losing jobs, where it is indeed at a certain point possible to rely on artificial intelligence to do basic analysis for lawyers, for people who are doing medical research, that may take jobs away from people. And so we have to prepare our society for the competition that's going to be not between artificial intelligence and people, but between people in the workforce who use artificial intelligence and those who do not. And that means it's going to be a very, very difficult situation for the labor market. And then one last area that I think is very important is energy. We find that here where I sit in Northern Virginia, 70% of the internet traffic in the United States goes through data centers that are located here. Those data centers are being driven by demand for computing capacity for artificial intelligence. And so we have to be conscious of where are we going to provide the electricity to keep all of these data centers going when the needs for artificial intelligence are going to be growing as well. So three parts to answer your question. One, at the university level, two, at the level of society, and third, at the level of economics and energy. It is the biggest issue as a social and economic issue that I've seen in my lifetime.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And finally, as a sign of respect for your diplomatic experience, for your teaching activities, I am also a teacher by profession. I would like to ask you what you would like to say to our viewers, our listeners, and people who, in principle, so to speak, are trying to understand the immensity.
Well, all I can say is the most important thing is to be patient. We are going through our own set of challenges and changes internally, both as a society and in terms of our political system. Don't believe everything you hear on the internet because it's not always true. And recognize that for all of the the conflicting information that seems to be coming out of Washington, both about what our international policies are and our domestic policies are, there is a bedrock of decency and commitment to our constitutional way of governing that will transcend whatever is going on in Washington today. So most important, be patient, be understanding, and don't believe everything that you read on the internet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for the fact that you have found time for us, spent your precious time, your knowledge, your thoughts for us. I hope that you will agree to continue our communication, meetings on air, and we will be able to make a cycle of transmission with Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for your time, for your knowledge and peace to your home.
Well, and thank you for the excellent questions. You've raised all of the important issues that face all of us. And so I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much. Good luck, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.